Reuters is reporting that the ransom notes that were sent regarding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance are fake. Are you able to confirm that those have been determined to be fake?
I'm not going to comment on that. We are continuing to assist that investigation. We've always been in an assist role. It's a state matter being led by the state authorities. Thank you.
Been a lot of talk about ransom notes. We're looking into that, and those are notes that we've been pretty consistent. You know, you divvy up the work, right? We took the DNA, we gave the ransom notes to the FBI.
9:45 p.m. Tucson, Arizona. An 84-year-old woman turns in for the night, same as any other night. It's the last time anyone sees her. 9 days later, the FBI releases doorbell footage, a masked man, armed, standing feet from her front door in the dark. Then the notes arrive. Millions in Bitcoin. A deadline. And a second message so disturbing, 2 networks agreed to sit on it before going public. Federal agents can't agree with each other on what's real. Welcome to Case Alert HQ. Today's case, the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Hit subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who loves a mystery. Let's get into it. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She lives alone in the Catalina foothills, a quiet residential stretch on the edge of Tucson, Arizona, framed by dry desert hills and long, dark streets. It's the kind of neighborhood where houses sit apart, gates stay unlocked, and nothing serious ever seems to happen. She's a mother of 3 and a grandmother, known to neighbors and lifelong friends as sharp, independent, and deeply rooted in her community. One of her children is Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, recognized by millions of viewers every single weekday morning. That connection is not why this case matters. It's why the rest of the world found out about it in the first place. Within days, a local disappearance became a story followed closely by federal investigators, national newsrooms, and true crime audiences across multiple countries. Nancy's other 2 children are Annie and Cameron Guthrie. Annie hosted a family dinner the night everything changed. Cameron would later stand beside his sisters in front of national cameras, appealing directly to the public for any information at all. Then there's Tommaso Cioni, Annie's husband, and Nancy's son-in-law. He's the last person confirmed to have seen her that night, alive and well. He's the one who drove her home. Here's exactly what happened next, told carefully, hour by hour. Saturday, January 31st. It's family night at Annie's house, dinner, conversation, the kind of evening that blends into every other Saturday in memory. Nancy is there, relaxed, unremarkable, no different from 100 nights before it. Around 9:48 in the evening, Tommaso Cioni loads her into his car and drives her the short distance home. Security data from her garage door captures the moment. It opens at 9:48, closes 2 minutes later. That's the last confirmed evidence that Nancy Guthrie is safe inside her own house. Nothing about the night stood out as unusual. From there, the timeline goes quiet, until it doesn't. At 1:47 in the morning, her doorbell camera disconnects. Not turned off, disconnected, as if something physically interfered with it. 25 minutes later, software inside the house registers motion, someone, or something, moving through rooms that should be empty at that hour. At 2:28 a.m., a separate signal goes dark. The app linked to Nancy's pacemaker loses its connection to her phone. For a woman who depends on that device being nearby, that disconnection means one of 2 things. Either her phone was left behind, or she wasn't near it anymore. It's a small detail, but it matters a great deal in the earliest hours of this case. Here's where the investigation runs into its first real obstacle. Nancy didn't have an active subscription for her doorbell camera's cloud storage. That means the actual video from those critical minutes wasn't sitting anywhere, waiting to be pulled. All investigators had at first were connection logs, timestamps showing the camera going offline and coming back on, without a single frame of footage attached to them. According to FBI Director Kash Patel, it was his own agency that pushed to recover it anyway, reaching out directly to Google's leadership and asking them to dig into deep, cached data before it could be deleted for good. Days later, that persistence is what finally produces the footage the public sees. While all of this unfolds in the middle of the night, nobody around Nancy knows anything is wrong. She has a standing habit, joining a virtual church service with friends every Sunday morning. When she doesn't show up, and doesn't respond, those friends do what friends do. They call her family. Relatives arrive at the house late Sunday morning. Nothing looks obviously out of place from the outside, but Nancy isn't answering, and she isn't there. Around noon, 911 is called. Sheriff's deputies from Pima County arrive at the property within minutes. That's when the case turns. On the front porch, deputies find blood. It's later confirmed, through testing, to belong to Nancy. By February 2nd, one day after she's reported missing, the investigation officially changes shape. What began as a missing person search becomes a criminal investigation. Nancy's home is declared a crime scene. The Pima County Sheriff's Department takes the lead on what is now, by every definition, an active abduction case. For 10 days, there's little for the public to see. Then, on February 10th, the FBI releases something that changes the entire tone of the case: doorbell camera footage, finally recovered, showing a masked individual standing at Nancy's front door in the hours before her disappearance. The person in the footage is armed, a handgun visible in a holster at their side. They're carrying a black backpack, later identified as a 25-liter hiking-style pack, the kind sold under outdoor brands like Ozark Trail. In the footage, this person reaches toward the camera itself, the same camera that would go dark hours later. It's the first real physical description the public has of anyone connected to what happened inside that house. But almost immediately, a second image complicates the story. FBI Director Kash Patel releases a separate photo, appearing to show the same individual, this time without the backpack, and without a visible weapon. A law enforcement source suggests to reporters that this second image might not be from the same night at all. It could be from an earlier visit to the property, days or even weeks before the abduction. If that's accurate, it would mean whoever this is had been watching the house before ever stepping onto that porch in the dark. The Pima County Sheriff's Department pushes back hard on that theory. There's no timestamp on either image, they say publicly, and claiming the two photos were taken on separate nights is pure speculation, not fact. It's a small disagreement on the surface. But it's also the first visible crack between two agencies that are supposed to be working this case together, a crack that's going to widen considerably, and publicly, as the months go on. If you're still with me at this point, drop a quick comment that just says, "I'm still here." I really want to know how many of you are locked in. 3 days into the search, before investigators have any real answers, letters start arriving. TMZ receives one. 2 local Tucson television stations receive their own copies. All of them claim to be from whoever took Nancy. The first note makes a serious financial demand, millions of dollars, payable in Bitcoin. Early reporting puts the figure at 4 million. Within days, that number climbs to 6 million, with a hard deadline attached. What makes investigators take this note seriously isn't the money itself. It's the detail written into it, specific references to the interior of Nancy's home, small things a stranger with no connection to the house would have no way of knowing. That detail becomes the difference between a note law enforcement quietly dismisses and one they actually build an entire strategy around. Then, on February 6th, a second note arrives, sent to a different outlet than the first. This one is different in tone and in weight. According to people familiar with its contents, it suggests Nancy died shortly after she was taken. Investigators ask that this detail be kept out of the press entirely, arguing that publishing it could compromise leads they're still actively chasing. That request holds, quietly, for months. The public wouldn't learn what this second note actually claimed until June. On February 7th, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron release a joint video statement. Their message is short and direct. They say they understand, and they say they'll pay. 2 days later, the first ransom deadline passes quietly. No money changes hands. No further contact follows. Savannah posts again, this time speaking past the note's author, straight to the public, asking anyone with information to come forward. By February 24, 24 full days into the search, Savannah makes the hardest public statement yet. She acknowledges, on camera, that her mother may already be gone. In that very same window, the family adds their own reward, up to $1 million, on top of what's already been publicly offered. The numbers keep moving throughout all of this. The FBI's initial reward starts at $50,000. It doubles to $100,000 within weeks. Once the family's own contribution is added on top, the combined total climbs past $1.2 million, one of the largest rewards ever offered in a missing persons case in the United States. And still, weeks pass. No suspect. No confirmed contact from whoever sent those letters. Just notes, deadlines, and a family left standing in public, trying to decide how much hope, and how much money, they're willing to risk on the chance that any of it turns out to be real. Underneath everything else in this case, there's a second conflict running the entire time, and it isn't between investigators and a suspect. It's between two of the agencies supposed to be working this case together. FBI Director Kash Patel has stated publicly that his agency wasn't given access to the crime scene until 4 days after Nancy was reported missing. For 4 days, we were kept out of the investigation, Patel said in one televised interview. In a case where the first hours matter most, that gap is significant, and Patel has repeated it more than once on national television. Patel has also said the FBI offered to run forensic testing at its own lab in Quantico early on, and that the sheriff's department chose instead to send evidence to a private lab in Florida. That decision, he says, cost the case time it didn't need to lose. The picture isn't quite that simple, though. Roughly 11 weeks after that evidence was first collected, it was, in fact, forwarded on to Quantico as well. So the idea of one agency being frozen out entirely doesn't fully hold up. What's clear is that the early handoff between these two agencies was messy, and that mess became public. The Sheriff's Department disputes Patel's timeline outright. Sheriff Nanos has said coordination with the Bureau began without delay, and that a member of the FBI's own task force was present at the scene the night Nancy was reported missing. Then, on June 30th, this tension boils over completely. Reuters publishes a report, citing an anonymous FBI source, claiming that all 3 ransom-related messages tied to this case have been determined to be fake. The very next day, July 1st, the FBI's own Phoenix office contradicts that report publicly. Some notes, they say, were extortion attempts with no legitimacy. Others, they add, are still being actively investigated as potentially real. 2 short statements. Same agency. Less than 24 hours apart. Saying 2 completely different things. That's not commentary, and it's not speculation. It's a documented contradiction, straight from official channels, and it's one of the clearest signs yet that even the people running this investigation can't fully agree on what they're looking at. There's one part of this case that rarely makes the headlines, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. Shortly after Nancy disappeared, a nonprofit called the United Cajun Navy stepped forward. They're a volunteer search and rescue organization, experienced in covering difficult terrain, and they didn't just offer to help in general terms. They put together a formal, 41-page proposal and submitted it directly to the Pima County Sheriff's Department. The plan was specific. Certified cadaver dogs. Scent tracking K9 units. Heat-detecting drones capable of scanning wide stretches of ground. Their focus area was the desert terrain near the Arizona-Mexico border, rugged, remote land that's difficult for any single agency to cover alone. According to Brian Trochers, the organization's vice president, that offer was turned down. Not once, but repeatedly. He's described it publicly as a blanket declination, meaning the Sheriff's Department wasn't just rejecting the United Cajun Navy specifically. They were refusing outside help altogether, regardless of who was offering it. As of this recording, that expanded ground search still hasn't happened. No press conference has explained why. No official statement has laid out the reasoning behind turning away a group with real search and rescue experience and no cost attached to their help. Whether accepting that offer would have changed anything about this case is impossible to know for certain from the outside. Nobody can say with any real certainty what a wider search would or wouldn't have found. But the refusal itself isn't speculation at all. It's a documented, on-the-record fact. And 5 months into a case with no suspect and no answers, it's a fair thing to sit with. Quick one before we keep going. Drop a comment with where in the world you're watching this from. Let's see exactly how many countries are following this case right now. Within hours of the FBI releasing that doorbell footage, the investigation gets its first real jolt of activity. A person of interest is stopped near Rio Rico, roughly 60 miles south of Tucson, close to the border, during a routine traffic stop. The FBI and the Sheriff's Department move quickly, executing a search warrant on a home and a vehicle connected to the man. For a moment, it looks like this could be the break everyone's been waiting for, a physical description matched to an actual person, in an actual location, within driving distance of the crime scene. It isn't. Within about 24 hours, the man, identified only by a first name, is released without charge. Sheriff Nanos confirms publicly that he's been cleared and had no involvement. A retired FBI official later notes the stop pulled significant manpower away from the rest of the investigation for the better part of a day, for a lead that ultimately went nowhere. It's a reminder of how much of real investigative work looks like this: promising, urgent, resource-intensive, and then, often, a dead end that quietly closes without much public follow-up. Evidence from the area tells a similar tale. Investigators collect around 16 gloves from the area surrounding Nancy's property. One, found roughly 2 to 2.5 miles from the house, looks promising, a possible match to whatever the suspect in the doorbell footage was wearing. It's tested. It comes back negative. No connection to the crime scene DNA. No hit in CODIS, the FBI's National Offender Database. That glove is eventually traced to a local restaurant worker with no connection to this case whatsoever. Another documented dead end. But separately, inside the house itself, investigators recover something more promising: a hair, and a mixed DNA sample that doesn't match Nancy or anyone in her known circle. Here's the complication. The hair has no root. For decades, that alone would have made it nearly useless in a case like this. Nuclear DNA, the specific kind used to identify a person with any real precision, typically comes from the root of a hair, not the shaft. A shaft without a root mostly contains mitochondrial DNA, which is far less specific, since it's shared identically across an entire maternal bloodline rather than being unique to one individual. Without a root, forensic labs were traditionally left with very little to work with. That, combined with the fact that the DNA recovered from the house is described as a mixed sample, meaning it likely comes from more than one person, makes this an unusually difficult piece of evidence to untangle. That's changed, thanks largely to two men. Dr. Greg Hampikian, a forensic scientist at Boise State University and founder of the Idaho Innocence Project, has spent years working on exactly this problem. Alongside him is Dr. Ed Green, a geneticist best known for his work sequencing Neanderthal DNA. Together, they helped pioneer a method for pulling usable genetic profiles out of severely degraded, rootless hair. The technique traces back to a case that mattered deeply to both men. Charles Fain, wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death in Idaho, was eventually exonerated using early hair-based DNA testing, a breakthrough that evolved into the more advanced methods used today. That work now runs through a lab called Astrea Forensics, founded on Green's methods, credited with helping crack multiple previously unsolvable cases. By April, the hair recovered from inside Nancy's house, after initial testing at the private lab in Florida, was forwarded to the FBI for more advanced sequencing. Genetic genealogist Cece Moore has spoken specifically about evidence like this, in an interview shortly after the hair sample reached the FBI. Her exact words were that hair of this kind can absolutely make a case solvable. But she's also been careful to call it a Hail Mary, hopeful, but far from guaranteed. Getting a usable genetic profile is only half the job. Matching it against genealogy databases can take months, and the outcome depends heavily on whether anyone related to the source of that hair has ever submitted their own DNA. There's one more thread worth mentioning here, more theory than fact, but useful for understanding how investigators are likely thinking about this. A retired FBI agent has publicly analyzed the suspect's movement in the doorbell footage, studying gait, posture, and pacing, and has offered his own read on the individual's likely age and physical condition based purely on how they move. Separately, another behavioral analyst has floated a different possibility entirely, that the person seen at the door may not be the one who planned any of this at all, but someone else, hired or otherwise brought in, to carry out the physical act itself. Neither theory is confirmed, and neither should be treated as fact. But both are worth knowing, because they shape how investigators are likely approaching this case behind closed doors, and they raise the possibility that more than one person is involved. What all of this adds up to is a fairly clear, and fairly encouraging, picture. The science required to identify whoever left that hair behind already exists, and it's already being actively used on this exact case. The bottleneck isn't technology anymore. It's coverage, whether the right person, or someone closely related to them, has ever shown up in a genealogy database anywhere in the world. Not every piece of this case involves federal agencies or forensic labs. Some of it plays out in far stranger, smaller corners, and one of those corners involves a completely separate letter. Defense attorney Mark Garagos, a regular legal commentator on News Nation, has drawn public attention to a different note sent to TMZ, separate from the two ransom letters already covered in this story, one asking for roughly a single Bitcoin. Compared to the multi-million-dollar demands made earlier in this case, that number stands out immediately. It's a strange, oddly small ask, and it's raised real questions about who might be behind it, and why someone would risk sending a note like this at all. Garagos has floated a theory worth understanding, even though it remains just that, a theory. If someone out there genuinely has information about what happened to Nancy, but is afraid of being implicated themselves, a lawyer could step in and negotiate what's sometimes called a reverse proffer, a limited form of protection in exchange for real, verifiable information. It's a legal path that exists. Whether anyone connected to this case is actually using it is unknown. While that theory remains unresolved, one thread in this case has already reached a legal conclusion, just not the one anyone was hoping for. Derrick Calella, 42, from Los Angeles, directly texted Nancy Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni on February 4, referencing an earlier ransom demand and asking about a Bitcoin transfer. He had absolutely no documented connection to Nancy's disappearance. Prosecutors say he was simply exploiting a grieving family's desperation for information. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Arizona took on the case. On July 2, Calella pleaded guilty to 2 federal counts of harassment by telecommunications device. He faces up to 2 years in prison and $250,000 in fines, though his plea agreement calls for 5 years of probation instead. Sentencing is currently scheduled for September 10. It's worth being precise about what this particular conviction actually means, because it would be easy to misread it. It closes the book on one man harassing one grieving family during their worst possible moment. It says absolutely nothing about who abducted Nancy Guthrie. It says nothing about whether the earlier ransom notes were ever real to begin with. Those bigger questions remain exactly as open as they were before Calella was ever caught. So where does this actually leave the case, right now, exactly as it stands? No suspect has been publicly named. No arrest has been made. 5 months in, the person or people responsible for taking Nancy Guthrie remain unidentified. The FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department are still, as of this recording, publicly divided over which of the ransom notes were ever legitimate. That disagreement hasn't been resolved. If anything, it's grown more pointed with each new statement from either side. DNA analysis on the hair and the mixed sample recovered from the house is still ongoing, still working its way through federal testing, with no announced timeline for when, or if, it will produce a match. The United Cajun Navy's offer to conduct an expanded search still hasn't been accepted, and no ground search of that scale has taken place. Savannah Guthrie, meanwhile, stepped back from her role at the Today Show, including coverage of the 2026 Winter Olympics, to focus entirely on her mother's case. The family has also donated $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, saying publicly that they don't want their own pain to be the only thing that brings attention to cases like this. Strip away the agency disputes, the forensic timelines, and the theories still floating around this case, and one fact remains untouched by any of it. A family is still waiting. And right now, nobody can tell them when that waiting ends. This case isn't over yet, and there's no honest way to end this video pretending that it is. What's clear, looking at everything laid out here, is that the science is moving faster than most people realize. A rootless hair that would have meant nothing a decade ago now sits inside an active federal investigation with a real path toward identification. That alone separates this case from countless others that stall out completely once physical leads run dry. What's also clear is that the people running this investigation still don't fully agree with each other, and a family that's already lost months of certainty is left watching that disagreement play out in public, headline by headline, statement by statement. There's no tidy conclusion to offer here today, because one simply doesn't exist yet. What exists is an active case, a family still waiting for real answers, and evidence that hasn't finished speaking. We'll be right here when it finally does. If you want to be here for the real update, and not just another recycled headline, hit subscribe, tap the bell for notifications, and like this video before you go.